Welcome, and thank you for clicking on this video. Let's talk about some of the things that you need to know in order to find the right strings for your short scale bass. I'm going to break this video down into two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about some of the guidelines and some of the things you must consider in order to find the right strings for your short scale bass. And in the second part, I'm going to share with you how I string up my short scale basses. Here we go. Before we get started, I want to declare that I do not have any affiliations whatsoever with any string manufacturers. I do not have a string deal, nor am I sponsored by any of the companies. The companies and the strings I will be talking about today are either strings that I have personal experience with, strings I like to play, or companies that I find have a really good website resource and present their information in a very accessible and useful manner. Now, there are lots of string guides available over the internet from both string distributors and the string companies themselves. I found a really good one from Labella, and you can find their string guide on their website. To help with me making a visual demonstration of some of the guidelines and principles you should follow when finding strings, I've assembled this model here. Here's a fun fact. This neck was the first neck I defretted on my own, probably about 15 years ago. That was definitely during my wannabe Jacko phase. But this particular neck had a massive dead spot at F sharp right there. So despite having gigged this neck bolted onto a Sunburst body, it eventually had to be replaced. Here I have bolted this neck onto a 2x4. But what I've done is I've measured out the different scale lengths here from 34 inches to 30 and then 28.6 inches. Now the ball end typically sits about 1.125 to 1.25 inches from the saddle. So that's what these holes represent. And this line here is a tailpiece stop for a Hofner Beatle-style bass. Now let's talk about what is often referred to as the string wound length. And that is the length measured from the ball to the area where there's a step or a taper in the string. This particular round wound is a Atelier XL nickel, and I'll put up a picture here so you can have a closer look at that step taper. Why is this important? This length has to be long enough for the step to be past the nut, but not wrapped around the tuner. So ideally, you want that step to sit right there, in between the nut and the tuner. Now there's a reason for that. The smaller diameter after the step here allows the string to more easily wrap around the tuning gear without accidental breakage or exposing the core of the string. Similarly, on a flat wound or a tape wound, you often see silk wrappings, both just before the taper, over the taper, and then past the step. Here, you want the silk to start again after the nut, between the nut and the tuner. You do not ever want to have silk resting over the nut here, and you want to try your best never to have the flat wound or tape wound windings wrapping over the tuning gear like that. When that happens, you risk again having the string unravel, exposing the core, and having the string break. So on this tape wound string, again, the string wound length is the distance between the ball end to the beginning of the silk winding. Now let's take the string and let's put it to the 30-inch scale line. I'm going to put that ball in the hole. I'm going to pinch my fingers as a visual guide for you to know where the taper and the step is. So it's right there. And as I place the string over, you can see it's perfectly sitting between the nut and the tuning gear. This is the most ideal scenario. So that's for a 30-inch scale. Now, what would happen if you had a string-through Mustang bass, say? Those string-through Mustang basses are still 30-inch scales, but because it's string-through body, you need extra length. So I've actually drilled this all the way through here. So let's try stringing this through the body. Again, I'm going to put my fingers pinched here where the taper is. And as you can see, that is not in the right place. That is sitting over the fingerboard, which is a no-no. If you actually strung your bass up like this here, first of all, with the smaller diameter of the string, it's going to sit way too low in the nut, and the whole string is just going to sit too low. But more importantly, you're actually going to rob the string of its speaking length, and you're going to rob vibration from the string, and tonally, it's not going to sound very good. So what's the take-home message here? If you have a 30-inch scale that's top load, for example, like a Fender Player Series PJ Mustang, for a top load, you want what's marketed as a short scale string, and that is what this one is here. So the step and the taper end will sit between the nut and the tuning peg. If you, however, have a through body Mustang, either of the Made in Japan, the Vintage series, or any of the new kind of Vintera style reissues, then the short scale strings are going to be too short, and you will need likely a medium scale. So D'Addario makes both short and medium scales in their XL nickels, in their tape wounds, and their chrome flat wounds. So let me demonstrate that with a tape wound. It is a short scale D'Addario tape wound. Again, I'm going to put it here at the 30-inch scale marker. And I'll pinch the end here where the silk end begins. And as you can tell, the beginning of the silk end and the taper is perfectly in between the nut and the tuning gear. However, if I were to put this through body, still 30-inch scale, but string it through the body, you will see, because here's the beginning of the silk end again, that is over the fingerboard, and that is a no-no. So what do you do if you have a through body Mustang? You either need to go with a medium scale string, and a company such as D'Addario makes the medium scale, or you can also consider a specialty set. For instance, Labella makes a specific for through body Mustang flat wound string where it fits perfectly for the extra string length required for a through body Mustang. But let's say you're not a fan of Labella strings. Maybe you find them too tight, or you don't like the way they feel or sound. You want to try another brand of flat wounds, but you also don't like D'Addario chromes. Well, what do you do then? And this is where things get a little trickier. As far as I understand, Fender does not make a medium scale flat wound string, despite making through body Mustang basses. If you look at the Justin Meldal Johnson, the JMJ model Mustang, the JMJ Mustang actually comes with long scale Fender branded flat wounds. And as you can see in the picture, despite what I just said a few minutes ago, you see exposed flat windings over the tuning gear. Now, seeing how that long scale Fender flat wound comes stock with a JMJ, is that Fender's way of saying that's okay? I certainly hope so. If there are any other users of the long scale Fender flat wounds on a through body Mustang, please leave some comments below and let me know what your experiences are like. All right, now let's get into another tricky scale length, and that's the 28.6 inch scale length. So these are becoming increasingly popular in the mini bass land. For instance, the Squier Mini Precision and the Ibanez Micro all feature 28.6 inch scales. Now, finding strings for these super short scale basses can be pretty difficult. So the Ibanez Micro comes with its own brand of micro strings, and you can buy those online. However, if you look at the picture I'm going to put up here, on the round wound version from Ibanez, it doesn't look like those micro strings have any step or taper at all, which is interesting. Let's take our short scale D'Addario here, and let's put it up to the 28.6 scale line. When we stretch this out, the taper of the string, again, I'm going to pinch it, goes slightly over the tuning peg. And when I actually measured these out, the distance between the nut and the tuning peg here on this neck is very similar to the Micro and the Mini P, in case you were wondering. Let's try it with the tape wound. There's the silk end. We're on the 28.6 line. So here, the silk end starts slightly after the tuning gear. Now, I did manage to find a photograph from Talkbass on a Lefty Micro that does show that the D'Addario XL short scale tape wounds can fit an Ibanez Micro. So if you wanted replacement round wounds for your 28.6 inch scale bass, the Squier Mini P comes stock with Fender branded nickels gauges 90 to 45 as advertised on their website, which is the same strings and actually the only short scale nickel round wound strings that Fender makes. And those are the same strings that come on a Player PJ Mustang. So Fender only makes one model, and it looks like they use it for both the top load 30 inch Fender Mustang as well as the Squier Mini P. But let's say you're not interested in round wound strings for your super short scale bass and you want flat wounds. Well, unfortunately, from the research I've done, your options are pretty limited. The short scale tapes and chromes from the D'Addario, as I've just shown, are not ideal because you do have some flat windings that likely will go past the tuning gear. However, all is not lost because Labella actually makes a specialty flat wound set specifically for the Mini Precision bass. So if you are interested in having flat wounds fit your 28.6 inch scale bass, I think Labella is probably the most rest assured and safest way to get a quality flat wound for your super short scale bass. Now let's talk about Hofner basses. The Hofner Beatle bass and the Hofner club bass in particular. Those are 30 inch scale basses. However, the presence of the tailpiece and where the ball sits in the tailpiece in relation to the nut makes it more effectively a 32 inch. So you do need a longer string to make it fit. So that's problem number one with those Hofner basses. The other thing you have to really consider is on the tuning gear end of a Hofner bass, the hole where the string passes through is incredibly small. So the majority of flat wound strings will not fit through the hole in those tuners. Now, I managed to wrestle a set of Thomastik Infeld flats onto my Hofner, and I've made a few videos with my Hofner club bass with TI flats on it. However, I would not at all recommend that to anyone. And in fact, I've actually changed those strings. So Labella makes a flat wound from their Deep Talking Bass series that's actually for Hofner Beatle bass only. And these have they have the correct string wound length, but most importantly, and I'll show you later in the video, they have a very, very small gauge taper that allows you to actually tune up your Hofner bass. So if you are looking for flat or round wound strings for your Hofner bass, you have to really be sure that the packages from any of the manufacturers, not just Labella, clearly is labeled as for a Beatle bass. Otherwise, chances are the E string will not fit. Well, I hope this visual demonstration really helped you get a better sense of how to get measurements and get the right string wound length to fit your short scale bass. Now on to the second part of the video. I had promised you that I would share with you how I've strung up my short scale basses. So here we go. Let's start with my first gen Fender PJ Mustang, 30-inch scale, top load only. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I'm a big fan of Thomastik Infeld flat wounds, and that's what I have on this bass. But despite everything I've just told you in the first half of the video about not having any exposed flat windings over the tuning gear, that's exactly what I have done here. And I have not actually followed any guidelines at all. So I must tell you that I am not affiliated with Thomastik Infeld, and I'm quite sure the people at Thomastik will tell you not to do this. However, I really like how TI flats feel under my fingers, especially how fragile my fingertips are with my medical condition. So I had gotten so used to playing the TI flats on my long scales that I wanted the same similar feel on my short scales. And that's what I've done here. So I'll put up a picture so you can have a closer look, but there are clearly flat windings around the tuning peg. And it's a bit of a no-no, but you know what? These TI flats have been on this Mustang bass for over 7 years. I've gigged this bass, it's been in the studio, it's appeared on, in fact, these strings have been on several of the albums you see behind me, and, you know, knock on wood, I haven't broken any yet. So I think they sound great, and these strings on this Mustang really work for me. Now, when we were building my custom F-bass short scale, this hip shot bridge has the option of both top load and through body. And when we were building it, we initially had it through body, through body, and the strings that were initially on this bass were the short scale version of the TI flats. Now, the string wound length fit this bass through body perfectly, and there were no flat windings around the peg. However, for reasons I don't understand, the gauges on the short scale TI flats are different than the long scale TI flats. Namely, the E string, the gauge on the short scale is a 106, but on the long scale is a 100. And I just couldn't get used to the 106. It just felt different to me. It felt different than my other basses. And after some reflection, I also realized I prefer the feel and the tone I was getting from the top load bridge. So I ended up re-stringing my F bass with the long scale TI flats top load with a 100 gauge E string that comes stock on the long scale TI flats. And I'll put up a photo of what the headstock looks like now. Now it's slightly different that it's a 2+2 configuration as well. So now I have exposed windings on the E and on my 2 high strings as well. Far from ideal. Again, the people from Thomastik will likely tell you never to do this. But for me, this is the feel and the sound that I prefer, and I feel it matches this bass really well. And these long scale TI flats have been on this F bass now for, I want to say 2 or 3 months now, and they, again, knock on wood, have not given me problems. Now watch me break a string on Sunday. My short scale Atelier Z J bass. That is a 30.5 inch scale, top load. I had the Dario short scales, had Ernie Ball short scales, and they all just felt too stiff for what I wanted out of a string. So I ended up putting Dunlop super bright nickels, gauges 100 to 40 on this bass. And again, I've broken the rules, and I'm sure the folks at Dunlop will tell you never to do this. But I do have the step of the taper on the low E string right there is exposed. Now these strings have been on this bass for well over a year, and they still sound pretty snappy. And again, knock on wood, I haven't broken a string yet. Now the Hofner is a different story. So this is my contemporary series club bass. I had, as I mentioned earlier, originally wrestled a set of TI flats onto this bass, and it sounded fine and it sounded good. And I've made a few videos with this club bass with the TI flats. Now, I will admit it looked kind of precarious at best. But I also wanted a different sound for this club bass after a while. I wanted something that was a little tubbier, and the TI flats definitely have a more pronounced mid-range to them. And oddly enough, for this bass, I felt the TIs to be a little too soft. And with the narrow string spacing on this bass, I wanted something actually a little stiffer. So I ended up getting the Labella deep talking bass for Hofner Beatle bass. These are gauges 96, 77, 56, and 39. Slightly different numbers than what I'm used to. But as I mentioned earlier, the holes for the strings to pass through on the tuning gears are incredibly small. So most flat wound strings will not, especially the E string, the E and the A strings in particular, will not pass through the hole. They are simply too thick. However, this Labella Beatle bass set, the taper is quite dramatic. And after the flat wound parts here, you can see the silk end is right there. It steps down very dramatically to a very thin gauge string that does allow you to put it through that incredibly small hole. So that's what I do, and despite having told you all the guidelines and rules to follow, I haven't followed any of them except for the Hofner now. Your mileage may and likely will vary, so this is my experience only. I certainly will recommend that please try to follow the guidelines and the fundamentals that I talked about earlier as much as you can. And hopefully as short scale basses become more popular, there will be more string options for us to choose from. And I really, really hope if someone from Thomastik is listening, please, please, please make a true short scale 30-inch set with a 100 gauge to low E string. I've been a long time TI players, but if you can make that set, I'd buy a box of them. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and good luck on finding the right strings for your short scale bass. Until next time, peace.